Steve Shanks. I'm an Episcopal deacon in the Diocese of Alabama, and my particular responsibility is the formation, support, and encouragement of communities around peace, justice, and nonviolence. So, yay for my bishop, that's one. And I've been coming here since 1998, and I'm a nonviolence trainer. I've also provided chaplaincy to prisoners of conscience and survivors of torture over the years. And Janet Chisholm is the other facilitator. Janet?
I currently work at Kirkridge Retreat Center, which has the motto, pick it and pray, pick it and pray. And I coordinate creating a culture of peace, nonviolence training program nationwide. Before that, I worked as the executive director and trainer at the Fellowship of Reconciliation. We need to agree on how we will act together. So ground rules or group process guidelines, we call them. And we put some up already, but I'll go through them and then you can tell me if you don't understand or if you want to add something. So group process. The last group said, let's turn off cell phones. So would you all do that? That helps. That we want everyone to participate and share, but to do it at a level that is safe for you and comfortable enough for you. We're not psychotherapists. We're not going to do that here. So please share that's safe for you. If there is something personal that gets shared from someone else, we ask you to please ask permission before you share it with anyone else, whether here or back home. Okay, so confidentiality. Basic to active nonviolence is respect. It's core. So it's respect for each other in the movement, but it's also respect for our opponents. And one of the best ways to show respect is by listening to each other. So that's very basic. iMessages, some of you may know what that means, but just to clarify, I am not going to speak for all Episcopalians, and I bet you're glad about that. I am not going to speak for all women. That we all think, we all feel. Okay. So I will speak for Jan. I feel, I think, my experience is. Okay? And we ask you to do the same. Speak from yourself and for yourself. Some of us in here are shyer, maybe even more thoughtful, maybe introvert, and yet we need to hear your voice. We need to hear your ideas. So if you are one of those, we ask you to please step up and share. If you are like me and more outgoing and you could talk a lot, we ask you to step back a little bit and do a little more listening. And the last group added, let's check it out. If there's something that seems provocative or you don't really understand, ask for it to be repeated or explained. Check it out. Don't make assumptions. So the hassle line is a classic exercise. It's been used in movement building and skill building for generations. Certainly was very involved in the civil rights movement and the various components of that, and it's involved in whenever we're protesting or rallying at a federal site. I work a lot at the Nevada nuclear test site, for example. And what it is a practice, a way to practice being peaceful in the face of being heckled or harassed or pushed or made fun of, or somebody who has a very different view, or somebody who is maybe trying to arrest us and we think that we have a right and they're saying, no, you can't do this. So I need to say, however, it is also useful within peace groups. It's useful within congregations. I've done it with congregations. So wherever we have conflicts and controversies, it can be used. But it's standard in this kind of movement. And that we will form in a minute 2 lines, and I will ask you to face somebody across from you, put your hands on their shoulder so that we see that we are actually equally paired up. It's just an easy way to do it. And then I will give you some instructions, and one side will be the people who are practicing being peacemakers. Okay? And I can give you some hints, and also the people who are your opponents will give you some hints about what was helpful in seeing you as a peacemaker. Okay? It means that in order for the peacemakers to practice, that we need people who will harass and heckle and get fire in the belly and not be timid about that. Okay? Because we need to have peacemakers practice. And we will switch roles. So everybody will be able to have some time being a hassler, and everybody will have time practicing being peace in the face of that. Do you have questions about it? Okay, some of you have already done this before. It continues to be valuable. So I ask you to stand, form 2 lines. Where are we going? This side are the peace people. And you are going to practice being peaceful in the face of being harassed. Okay? And the issue is that you're at the SOA in a rally, and you're being heckled and made fun of, called unpatriotic, etc., etc. Okay? How will you respond? That's your mission, is to figure out how are you going to respond as a peace person. You all need to harass and heckle and get fire in your belly, and don't make light of it, otherwise they can't practice. Okay? There's a cigarette. How can you do that with a baby? Give them a hard time. What is going to be standing? Who are doing this? What is the line? What are the lines that are used? What do people say when they heckle, make fun of you, say it's unpatriotic, it's naive, get a job? Okay? You don't support the troops? Obviously. Okay. So, I am going to ask you all to turn to the outside and center in to your role. Figure out what you are going to say and how you're going to act. Turn around, approach each other, and engage.
What are you doing here at my fort?
Just here protesting Antibullying the Americas.
Why?
We believe that it's wrong to teach torture.
Why? Well, they teach torture.
The manuals have been published.
No, we never teach torture. No, we don't. We teach our paratroopers and all that.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah. Oh, you're trying to put me on the job? Why? If they close the fort, I won't have a job.
Oh, I hear you're worried about losing your job.
City will go up. There won't be any city. I'm going to lose my job.
I hear you're really worried about losing your job.
Well, yeah. What do I live on if I don't have a
That would be really bad.
what kind of job do I get?
What are you skilled in?
I'm a MP here on the base. Military police. Yeah. What can I do?
I don't know the answer.
Go to another base, maybe.
Maybe.
And then they'll teach torture there, like you say they teach torture here. I don't believe that. I don't believe I teach torture. So why don't you just go home and leave us alone?
I have to believe it. I believe that this is teaching torture.
How do you know they teach torture? What
The manuals have been published.
manual is that?
The manuals. There's actual manuals that have been passed out. The U.S. Army has published.
Have you got a copy of that manual?
Not on me.
Have you ever read that manual?
Parts of it.
Where?
Online. You can read it online.
Oh, everything online is the truth? Everything on? We done? Oh.
Yes. You did great. Bravo. Okay. Now, I'm not going to usually ask the peacemakers how it was, but I will this time. How did it feel? Anybody? Short.
I had to defend myself.
You had to defend yourself?
Yes.
How? Physically?
No,
Verbally?
not
Emotionally?
physically, verbally and emotionally. And I felt put on the spot, and I had to think very quickly how to respond.
Okay. So you had to practice. Okay, someone else, how did it feel? But you tried to be patient and to listen and wait him out. Someone else, how did it feel to practice peacemaking?
Well, I really couldn't take her seriously because
These nice people.
Okay, in civil rights, they practice shoving, hitting, knocking to the ground, putting cigarettes out on their head, calling them nasty names. And that was so that they could remain steadfast, centered, nonviolent. Takes practice, okay? And it is serious. So we have to help each other practice, okay? The most important thing is to learn from these people who met peace people what they felt that the peace people did that was breaking down the stereotype of what peace people are, spoke of being peace, tried to build relationships, was positive and constructive. Okay, what did the peace people do that you might think is something we should remember as peace people?
She didn't point out the illogic of my attempts. Because I twisted it into, oh, but all these people in Iraq are, these soldiers are suffering, and which it doesn't exactly connect, but it's one that people use all the time. And she answered me instead of saying, well, that's stupid, that doesn't have anything to do with what I do.
How did she answer?
She said, well, I don't think that's always the right way to, for us to deal with those kind of problems. I mean, it was great. She was great.
Anyone else? Yes.
She looked me in my eye. She was her tone was very level. She tried to empathize with me. She asked me my name.
Okay, listen to that. Asked name, empathized, low tone, looked in my eyes. Those are things we all have control over. Someone else.
She asked me why I believed that, and I didn't know what to say.
Okay? Number one, it was asking a question instead of this kind of thing. I'm going to tell you. Asking a question elicits from the other. Okay? And what else did you say?
I didn't know what to say. She said, why do you believe that, and why do you think that?
And so those to the belief system. Okay, anybody else want to? Yes.
Janie, from the get-go, she looked at me and she said, I respect your opinion, and I respect what you believe, and she was like, let's talk about it. When I was getting in her face.
Okay, let's talk about it. It's great. Okay, so, all right. We need different partners, so would you go down that end? You will move down this way. So you have a new partner. Same roles. I know.
Not very good eye color.
Okay, so we're going to move fast.
There we go.
But I'm going to give the peace people another chance. They need more practice. Okay. So I expect you all to give them a hard time. This is not fun and games. I mean, it really is helpful.
I'm going to be a bad guy again.
All right, so
We're so good at it.
get yourself worked up
Prepare myself.
about how to handle it. Now I want to talk to these people over here. Some things you can try. Think about asking a question. Ask a question instead of a declarative, instead of an argumentative response.
Isn't
Ask a
asking why
question.
kind of,
Pardon?
it seems like asking why is kind of the best question. Because I mean, when somebody said why, I mean, it's kind of defensive, but the why is, what's up about why?
It's more like, well, what do you believe, or what is peace to you, or all kinds of things, or where are you from? Okay, a better question. Try using your first name. That's another experiment, just to try. Another thing is, remember, I talk with my hands. Very dangerous, very threatening, because people do not know what you're going to do with your hands. They should be down. And if you can stand slightly askance, you're less threatened. This is good for father-in-laws and mother-in-laws too. This is not so inviting. So, if you can find any common ground in all this, like you care about certain people together or military in your family or whatever, but anyway, is there any common ground? Listening. We've already mentioned the eyes, the ears, listening. Decide whether to smile or not. You don't want to smile. So just think of several things that you might try. Okay? Go back, turn to this way, and center in. Prepare yourself. Turn around, approach, and engage. But what I want to find out from the Hasslers is, did the peace people do some things that were disarming, breaking the stereotype?
One thing that Jamie did, she did talk to me and try to engage with me, but other times when I had to take a breath, she just let me take a breath, and then I was sort of like, in that silence, I just got lost and blah, blah, blah. What was I even yelling at you about? So sometimes that silence was disarming to me.
The silence was disarming. Thank you. She didn't jump in and fill it.
Right.
That's a similar kind of finding that balance between not interrupting, but still, because just being completely silent, it was, I could just go on, but then, so finding that balance between not interrupting and being too forceful, but also kind of standing your ground is really disarming. Or kind of
yeah, thank you. I think that's a good point about being totally silent can look like you've left your body and you're not paying attention, you're not really relating. So it's that middle way. Anybody else?
He took the insults I gave him without addressing them, like I was using profanity and called him a tree hugger, a hippie, and all kinds of stuff, and he didn't even address the things I said to him. He just he asked me a question. He asked me why I believe what I do. I started stumbling.
Okay. Anybody else?
He offered to shake my hand. That in the past has never worked for me. They're normally just like, I don't want to touch you, but like it does kind of throw you off because like I'm still human, and it makes them stumble for a second. So
that has mixed feelings too. So again, using our arms and hands can be very scary to the person opposite us, but we usually invite somebody to shake hands. So just think about it. Anybody else? Did using the first name, anybody who used the first name, did that help? Did you? No? Okay. All right, I can tell you to change roles. So you all are going to be the peace people this time, is that right? And you're happy about that? Yes. All right, that means you have to practice, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm going to tell you some things together. One is, think about using the first name, your first name. think about the tools you have in your body, not this, okay, not this, but this, as slightly askance, okay, is the least threatening, all right? You've already heard about the tools we have, how we use our eyes, our tone of voice, okay? Whether to smile or not smile is often a question. See if there's some way that you can raise a question. And somebody in the other group said maybe not a why question, but what do you think about X? Where did you come from? Where do you live? Or, you know, is there any way you can build a common bond, a human-to-human connection with this person? And another tool is to think about the opponent as a person. You probably have people in your lives that you disagree with greatly, but you still love them. So someone that you can love, the beloved. But you still want to stand your ground. You have a different point of view. But the way we approach the other is very important. And it's the only way we'll build the movement. Okay, so the peace people are going to turn around and center in. And the terrible harassers and hasslers are going to really give them a hard time. Right? Yes. Okay? You know all the arguments? All right? You're going to heckle them and harass them and make fun of them and call their patriotism into question. Right? Naivete. Okay. How do we get pity? So, center into your role. Approach and engage.
Bill, what the hell are you doing here? Wasting everybody's time. What's wrong? You want the morning? You want us to leave like a bunch of cowards? People are going to die. You are unpatriotic. Oh, great. Another piece of comedy.
You're saying your big sign say close the SOA. I want to close the SOA. How do you think it's going to It's not just like you go out there and pick up a gun. You're training to defend this country. You're disrespecting that. You're disrespecting all the skills that they have. Time of day. That's the first thing to do. You don't hear about any of it. You're just here in a favorable manner and you don't like it. It's not any of it. You do what it has to be done. Do you really think you're standing here in freedom because you don't hear it? I don't get that. I don't get it. It has to be done. That's why you're standing here today. Because what you're an American. Because people have done what you want to do. That's what shot. No matter what. No matter what. There are some times you have to do what you have to do. If he saved lives, you know what you have to do. He was a ranger. And he got what? Actually, a sniper shot. Anything that takes. There are times in life where you have to
What did they do? Did they seem to conduct themselves like peace people?
Yeah.
In what way? Tell me what they did.
Well, the more I ranted and raved, the more Bill seemed to just smile at me.
Okay. Did that antagonize you, or did that?
It kind of takes the wind out of your
It
sails.
took the wind out of your sails. Okay, thank you. Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
I felt that I was being pretty aggressive, and he was very peaceful. I just very peaceful look on his face, and he said, introduced himself. He's like, I'd really like to sit down with you if we could have more time and talk about this.
Okay. I'd really like to sit down and talk some more about this. Great. Okay, I'm not afraid of you. I'm willing to talk with you.
For my part, just just listen and the same thing. Look it in my eyes, stay real calm, and then waited for me to wind down and do this, and then she just gave, gave a nice response, and so it worked out really well.
And notice that people run out of gas.
It's hard to keep going.
It is hard to keep going. It's hard to have enough venom to keep it going.
You don't have that problem. You don't have that
Listening
problem.
helps.
I noticed that Chris
No, he
didn't seem to get intimidated by me, by invading his personal space. I was getting right up in his face, and he just was very calm and just not, he wasn't.
He didn't back off and run away.
He didn't run away and back, but he was just listening and very calm.
Okay, great. Is there anybody else who needs to say something new or different? Yes.
In the 3 years I've been here, I've never ran into anybody that would aggravate me like that.
Okay. So,
They're all very nice to me.
so let me just say this. The reason we practice is because a lot of these things are not said but are felt. Okay? And it's good practice for being a peace person wherever we are. And it might be your father-in-law. It might be somebody in your congregation.
It might be your brother.
It might be the cashier or your neighbor who knows you're going to SOA. Okay? This is a skill building workshop, and this is a basic skill. So this is probably the most difficult thing that you will do while you're here this whole weekend, because you're probably not going to get hassled like that. But it does happen. It happens in GLBT vigils and rallies. It happens in all kinds of places. So it is not time wasted.
Let's pull our newspapers out and turn to page 3, please. Particularly looking at the nonviolence guidelines. Those of you who have been here before know that, and you've heard speak, that this is a nonviolent movement to close the School of the Americas, Wednesday. And part of the tradition of SOA Watch is to invite people to carry on the tradition of the movement by respecting some basic nonviolence guidelines. And what I'd like to invite you to do, if you would, is to read these with me aloud together as our covenant to each other and to the community that we're joining at the rally and vigil this weekend. Our goal is to expose and close the School of the Americas with and to resist the oppressive policies and systems that it represents. We act in solidarity with our Latin American sisters and brothers and all those around the world whose lives are impacted by these policies as one part of an international struggle for human rights and global justice. As SOA Watch, we gather in the diverse traditions of nonviolence with respect for the right to self-determination of oppressed peoples and communities. Together we envision a day in which a culture of peace with justice and respect for earth will prevail, where all people will live together free from oppression. This weekend, in our tradition of nonviolence, we will gather together in a manner that reflects the world we choose to create. We will promote an alternative to domination systems by acting with love, respect, mutuality, compassion, and acceptance for the interdependence of all life. We will struggle for a world free from violence, and we will use actions, words, and symbols consistent with this struggle. We will not use or instigate violence against any person. We will act with respect for the people and property of the local community. We will promote the safety of ourselves and others through our actions and interactions. We commit to recognize and to work to dismantle all forms of oppression in our personal relationships, local neighborhoods, globally, and with Earth itself.
is a quote up here from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Steve, you were going to set it in context.
Well, just the letter from Birmingham Jail. I live in Birmingham, and this was something I wasn't aware of until I moved there. You know, the movement work in Birmingham had been going on for many months at this point, and they had escalated their activity. And Dr. King speaks to it here. And the letter from Birmingham Jail was written in response to a letter that was published in the newspaper and undersigned by all of the religious leaders in Birmingham, including my bishop at the time. So, the letter, which you know, that was part of the gift of his imprisonment, is he had an opportunity to draft this, I guess some would call it manifesto, but to me a great gift of hope for then and for generations to come. So that's what this was in response to, was mainstream religious leaders telling him, no, just take it slow, take your time. Change doesn't happen all at once. Be patient, just wait a little while longer.
Yeah, and even before that, you said, was the Nashville lunch counter sit-in, and many of us have seen the videotape from A Force More Powerful that shows Dr. King being questioned on Meet the Press by Eric Severide, who was a great commentator at the time, saying, Dr. King, don't you think it would be better to just do the boycott and not buy instead of doing the sit-ins? And his response is, sometimes we must dramatize the injustice. Gandhi talked about two forms of violence, of nonviolence, and one was protest and resistance, and the other one was constructive nonviolence. He said, only a little time in resistance and protest, most of our time should be creating the culture we want. Constructive program. Barbara Deming, the feminist who deepened our understanding of nonviolence, talked about this as the two hands of nonviolence. So I say, with this hand, I no to violence, to demonizing, to destruction. I say I'm going to protest and resist, and in fact I will even interfere. This is the hand of resistance and also of protection. With the other hand, I will reach out and offer us to build a new relationship. I will make myself vulnerable to change by listening, by engaging with you, and I ask you to do the same. Be vulnerable. It is frightening because we may have to change. But this is the hand that can construct something new and offers even the possibility of reconciliation. And I need both. All right, stand and let's do the wave. So I'm going to do an action and then you'll do it after me and hold it. And then it will come to you and eventually it will come to everybody. Eventually. And then there'll be a second action and then a third action. So are you ready? Okay.
Tell the lefties.
When it comes to you. We are the beneficiaries in this country of many, many movements of nonviolent social change. And don't think about it. And in fact, in some parts, some groups and some parts of the country, to mention nonviolent movement scares people. But in fact, we benefit. So I am going to ask you now just in kind of a calm kind of brainstorm, to name some of the movements in this country from which we benefit. Nonviolent social movements, mostly nonviolent. Yes?
World War II conscientious objectors.
Conscientious objectors.
Abolitionists.
Of slavery.
Yes.
Abolition of slavery. I'm going to punctuate it by saying it again, which slows us down just slightly and everybody maybe can hear it.
Labor unions.
Labor unions, and can you give an example? Because there are lots of things with labor unions.
Well, just the whole history of labor unions fighting for better wages.
Better wages.
Living conditions.
Living conditions.
Hours.
Hours.
Lack of child labor.
No child labor. Okay.
Behind you, Gina.
Women's suffrage.
Women's suffrage. Women can vote. A whole movement about that. Yes.
Right to marriage for all people.
Rights of marriage for all people. A movement still in process.
The feminist movement?
I didn't get it.
The feminist movement?
The feminist movement. Thank you. Can you name some parts of that?
Oh. Pro-choice. We have, of course, the women's suffrage movement. I just read all the same thing. The GBLT, the meshing. I can go on for days.
Okay.
The farm worker movement, similar to the union.
The farm worker movement, which continues to today.
We just associated with that. We just learned about the Southern Tenant Farmers Union and the actions that they did. It was very
The Southern Tenant Farmers Union. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And well, the sit-ins at the lunch counters as well as the people walking without taking buses, that was all in relation to civil rights.
The boycott. Yeah. So other social movements from which we benefit today.
Environmentalism.
Who said that? Environmental movements. Name some parts of that.
Greenpeace.
Greenpeace.
Just decreased poison of the earth, decreased carbon use, increased organic practices.
Organic foods, local foods.
Community-supported agriculture.
Community-supported agriculture, clean air, clean water, lots of different parts of that, right? Non-clear cutting.
Fellowship of Reconciliation.
Fellowship of Reconciliation, which
I got my first nonviolent training.
Is that where you took your first nonviolence training? Yes. And I was the executive director. But they have many parts of the work. Conscientious objection, they did journeys of reconciliation through the South with one black man and one white man in the 1940s, before what we think of as the major part of civil rights. Yes?
The Catholic worker movement.
Catholic worker movement. What's that?
Dorothy Day.
No, no smoking. No smoking zones. That's very new, isn't it? In the last few years, okay? Yes?
I was going to say the broader movement of intentional Christian communities.
Intentional Christian communities, yes. Thank you.
Veterans for Peace.
Veterans for Peace, the whole movement. And they've adopted active nonviolence.
Restorative justice.
Restorative justice movement, one of the newer movements. Restoring the offender, whether adult or child, back into the community. Come on, there's some more.
Jubilee.
Jubilee movement.
Treatment instead of prison.
I can't get it.
Treatment instead of prison.
Treatment instead of prison. Okay?
Coalition of Immokalee Workers.
Yay! Coalition of Immokalee Workers.
Can we eat at Burger King yet?
I don't know. Okay.
Does anybody know?
Within my time of working in social services, the whole awareness of the domestic violence conditions in our country, and is almost like the Underground Railroad. I mean, so people had safe houses to go to, okay, to escape. They were sometimes given and are sometimes given new identities. police were trained for the first time and there were laws passed to take action when there was domestic violence. That's a whole new important movement. We don't even think of it much. Child abuse awareness, which grew out of Protection for Animals, SPCA, started child abuse awareness and laws.
Choice movements.
Choice. Expand.
Well, Jane, in Chicago and other places, there were women who helped other women get abortions, as well as the clergy consultation for abortion.
Okay.
There's all kinds of connections with the movements for child security and safety and stuff.
Okay. Thank you. And somebody else?
Yeah, well, I don't know how to say this one, and then the others are dreaming, but one is to kind of normalize the idea of people who choose to live simply or to live nonviolently, and you know, the movement provides a normalization for us to know that there's others like us that do that way. And the other thing is, part of my dream is to see this work for school bullying. They haven't really gone down that path yet of using nonviolence to make somebody feel good for, you know, not fighting when they're confronted. But I think it has great potential for that.
Thank you. So in lots and lots of schools, there is anti-bullying work and conflict resolution training. Okay? And then we're talking about the simple living community, simple life, tax resistance, being under the tax level. Okay. Somebody else?
The movement for health coverage.
Movement for health coverage.
You know, as Medicare.
Okay, and Medicare does exist, so that's a whole movement. We benefit from so many movements, and they did not start, I would like to suggest, from up here, from the power holders. They started from ordinary people like us.
Well, I guess also, what about the church peace fellowships? There's Baptist Peace Fellowship, Episcopal Peace Fellowship, etc.
Thank you. Fellowship of Reconciliation early on, A.J. Musty said we must have, no, it was 7, it's there, I think. Anyway, Fellowship of Reconciliation said we must have fellowships in the different denominations and faith traditions. So there's a Jewish Peace Fellowship, a Muslim Peace Fellowship, a Hindu Peace Fellowship, etc., which live on the outside of the institution as a goad to the institution. Okay, to push it for more peace. I'm just trying to help us understand that we are benefiting today from many, many movements. It's not something to be afraid of. And within each movement, we have different components, if you like. So the goal of civil rights, the major goal was to end segregation, right? To end segregation. Okay. But there were specific campaigns underneath that. And one of the campaigns was the lunch counter sit-in. Okay. We're going to integrate. We want to integrate the whole culture, but we're going to focus and start somewhere. So we have a campaign to integrate the lunch counters. So just as in the environmental movement too, people have to focus on a particular campaign. Otherwise you don't get anything done, and you just remain devastated and despairing and hopeless, you know. So movement, major goal, a campaign, and what are some tactics that are possible? Legislative.
Sit-ins.
Can't hear you.
Sit-ins.
Sit-ins. Boycotts.
Civil disobedience.
Civil disobedience. Leafleting.
Letters to the editor.
Letters to the editor. Vigils. Okay. There are lots and lots of tactics and actions that can be taken. And so we were just trying to help us all get on that wavelength, that there are different levels. Movements, campaigns, tactics. One of the people that is the most helpful to many of us in understanding is Bill Moyer, not the television person. But he's wonderful. I'm not saying he's not helpful. But he's not the person I mentioned. Bill Moyer died a few years ago, but he created something, first in newsprint and now in a book called Doing Democracy. It's a paperback book. I highly recommend it to you if you want to understand movement building. He was a sociologist, Quaker, and he studied nonviolent social movements in the United States over a period of 40 years and said that they generally go through 8 stages to grow the movement. And he could describe each stage. He also said there were usually 4 roles that people could play, which is helpful because some of us in the peace and justice movement act like unless you go to prison for 6 months, you don't really care. Like that's the only action that really counts. That's the hierarchy. No, 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 no. Everybody does different things. Some of it might be counseling others. Some of it might be vigils. Some of it might be within a church community or a congregation. Some go to prison. But it isn't how many notches you have in your belt about going to prison. Okay. So, he said there are 4 roles. And what he does in his book is give you the stages and the roles, and then he actually takes 5 case histories and tell you how they developed. He tells you what the activists were doing at each of the 8 stages as a movement, what made the movement grow that the activists did. What are the power holders doing at each of those stages? As the activists get going, you know, the power holders react. And at one point, they actually begin to demonize because they think they're going to lose. They begin to demonize the activists and advocates. Okay? And he also tells how the public is won over. Continues to win over the public. We don't want to win on top of them victorious. We want to win them over to our point of view. Okay. So, just as an example, in the movement action plan, or the map that he outlines, a movement will start very small. It might be only 4 or 5 people talking. They have identified a problem. It could be a huge problem, like something in civil rights, or it could be children are walking, little children are walking to school, and there are lots of traffic now. And, you know, they're really in danger. We need to do something. There are movements of all sizes. So, it starts small, is the point. It starts with ordinary people like us at the grassroots. And then other people get involved. What he says is the second stage is that official channels are tested. That means we go to town hall, to a city council meeting. We might go to court. We might have a public hearing. And we find out it doesn't work. It doesn't make the changes we want. So we have to do research and we have to begin to organize. And usually along the way, he says, the victims of the injustice and oppression that's occurring become known. In the little example in a community, it might be a child gets hit by a car. And in civil rights, we know some of the terrible victimization that was done. Okay? And the victims' faces get known. At SOA, we get to know the victims, names, and faces. And that builds the movement further. And then he says, which is helpful to me, that stage 5 is the stage of despair and hopelessness. And that every movement seems to go through it. My recent example is before the Iraq bombing started, there were millions in the streets in the United States. There were millions in other countries saying, don't bomb Iraq. Don't go to war. Don't invade. And I guess we thought that the administration would come out and say, oh yeah, well, you're all marching now, we get it. That was unrealistic. So the bombing and the war began. Now, what happened is the peace meetings we tried to hold after that were very much down in numbers. People fell away. And that happened in all the other movements, the main movements that he outlines. And they fall away because they're burned out, they're discouraged, or they say, maybe violence would work this time. Nonviolence obviously didn't. So that stage we have to get through, and he says we need to hang together, that faithful remnant, and we need to do training and support each other. Okay? We eventually build the movement to success. And the key is the ordinary person. It's cheap ventilation. If I want to just say terrible things, throw things at the television or whatever, at people who are in the administration, supporting the School of Americas. But that is probably not the way to change things. The way to change things is by pulling in the ordinary person, the people we can talk to. And it's more work. So the people in our schools, in our congregations, in our neighborhoods, is the way to build the movement. It's a movement of ordinary people, a people power movement. So he really takes us through, as I said, case histories of breast cancer awareness movement, LGBTQ movement, the opposition to nuclear power plants movement, and the civil rights movement. In these, he says, there are generally 4 roles, and the one I'd like to pick out is the rebel. But he says there's a citizen, there is a reformer, usually within the institutions or main organizations, and there's a change agent, and there are rebels. And with each of these 4 roles, which he describes, there's a way to be effective and a way to be very ineffective and hurt the movement. So the rebel is not always bad. The rebel can be effective. What would be a way, how does a rebel help a movement? What are some ways?
Energizes it.
Energizes it.
Raises awareness.
Raises awareness. Okay, and as the King quote, dramatizes the issue. Okay, but there's a way to be an ineffective rebel, to really turn people off, to look violent, to look weird, to look like the weird people on the fringe, and then more people may not want to join the movement. So there's that balance, how to be effective and not hurt the movement. So we commend that to you. It may be interesting. Certainly it was transformative for me. It's the name, Doing Democracy. It's in paperback. And many of the longtime activists have said, yes, it makes sense, what I've been through. But it also shows us the stages that we're going toward to build the movement, and it gives you hope. He said he wrote the book because he was tired of peace and justice activists wallowing in despair. And he also says, look at what you've already accomplished and celebrate. Don't wait until the whole culture is integrated, or whatever your large goal is. Look at the incremental steps you are taking and celebrate. Have a party, sing songs. It's really important to nurture ourselves that way.
Well, to connect that to the next exercise, we're going to get up and move around a little bit more. And this exercise is called cross spectrum. Some of y'all might have done a barometer before, where you would move depending on whether or not you thought something was more, an activity was more or less violent or non-violent. And you have the limits of the room to move to. And that's one axis on the line. Just project that line into the corners. I didn't want to crawl under the chairs. But the other line we've added is effective and ineffective. So that we're thinking in those same terms that we were just discussing. Is the action that we're discussing going to be effective or ineffective? Because we're talking about taking this back and leveraging what we're doing to have a positive effect towards our particular issue. So, in terms of promoting a discussion of ideas, this is a helpful tool. So, I'd ask everybody to get up and move towards the middle. This is absolutely neutral, and as you're moving around, whenever we give you scenarios, you can stand on the line. You can stand in the center, and this is the perfectly neutral position between violence and nonviolence, and effective and ineffective. You can stand on the line, you can straddle the line, you can run hug the wall. But find your place between violent and nonviolent, and effective and ineffective. So, Janet.
So you may stand in one of the quadrants, is that right?
Yes.
So I'm going to read a scenario twice for you to listen to and then to take a position. And know that there's not a right or wrong. We're not judging, but we are listening to each other's perspective. So Steve will call on a few of you to volunteer your comments about why you took a certain position. The first one is that Gloria spray paints a billboard with the words, "This insults women," because she considers it sexist. Is her action violent or not violent, effective or not effective? Gloria spray paints a billboard, "This insults women," because she considers it sexist. What do you think of her action?
It's on the billboard. This insults women.
What's on the billboard?
Yeah. What's on the billboard that made him do that?
Very insulting women. Yeah, what is
I thought I'd come hug you.
ineffective? This is a
Old one, some of the darker ones do that. It must be blue. Okay, stop here. No, I'm just saying.
Okay, so everybody knows where they are. Now, I'm going to ask a few of you to tell me why you're standing where you are. But I also want to remind you that if you hear something that changes your mind, you can be moved by what you hear said. Literally. So, I'll ask the person straddling the line closest to me first why you're there.
Well, I've been involved in hanging a sign beside another sign. And I think the longer that stays there, it could be effective. So I sort of, well, I'm in the effective side, and I'm not sure about it. I'm a builder, and so I hate the idea of somebody breaking something that somebody built. So that's kind of why I'm straddling the line on violent versus nonviolent. But I'm a little bit more on the nonviolent side because it's just paint and it's not that big a deal.
And you think it's kind of effective?
Yeah, I think so. I think depends on. I mean, that particular wording, I think, made it more effective than some other just saying sexist or right. More simple, more clear it's a good message, I think.
We've got people hugging the corner of nonviolent and effective. Would one of y'all like to tell us why you're back there?
I've done it before.
Thanks, Gloria. We're not telling. I don't see anything wrong with spray painting on any kind of building, period. For me, it's our canvas. We make what we take of it. It's just when you're driving down a highway and you look up and you see a billboard where there's usually an advertisement for some really horrible, there's an advertisement for GM and someone spray painted over it, stop the war. It takes you out of your day-to-day, it just takes you out of your, wherever you are, in your car, driving wherever you're going, and it brings you back and reminds you of all the things that are going on in the world that you just completely zoned out about because you're focused on your thing. And I think it's an art form. I think you can, and the thing about it, it's an art form that you can destroy and create just as many times as you want, and it's still just as beautiful and still just as effective, no matter what's written, because it's someone's opinion, and everyone's opinion matters. So, thank you.
Okay. Well, that's the far end of effective. We've got some over here in the quadrant who think it's a bit violent and perhaps a bit ineffective. Would one of y'all like to?
I can speak. I find it violent partly because it's destroying something that someone built, and partly because it's taking away other women's voices. And I guess it would depend for me what's actually on the billboard, but saying this insults women takes the voice away from other women who are trying to change that in another way. And more often than not, I know people who would just be like, that's retarded, that's stupid, and just be like kind of goaded more the way that I don't want them to be because someone destroyed personal property and spoke out in a way that encompassed all voices where I don't feel like that should be done.
Okay.
I'm moving back where I was.
Who else would like to talk about why they're? Yeah.
I would say definitely leaning towards nonviolent. I think it's kind of dangerous when we speak of violence in regards to property, but also I'm standing a little bit on the ineffective side because I feel like that action can be easily dismissed in some ways. It's a billboard, people graffiti all the time, and part of me wonders if there's another way of bringing attention to the billboard rather than just spray painting in an anonymous way.
Yeah, because doing that 20 years ago before tags would be a lot different than it would be now, right? Because anybody who ever sees railroad cars going by, you know. So, that's it. Thanks, y'all. What you got, Janet?
All right. A high school teacher in social studies wants to bring the issues of the war in Iraq to his students' attention. Therefore, he shows a video of a resistance fighter in Iraq beheading an American contractor. Is the teacher's action violent, not violent, effective, not effective? A high school teacher wanting to raise the issues about the war in Iraq to his students in the social studies class shows a video of an Iraqi resistance fighter beheading an American contractor. What do you think of his action?
Did you say high school?
High school.
What's he trying to be effective at?
Yeah.
Just raising any issue about the war?
Who knows? He thinks he's trying to be effective in doing it. So that's the content.
You always have all the information before you make judgments.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a true situation, by the way.
Yeah, this isn't a hypothetical. This happened.
Somebody's almost out the door.
I know. I think we need to visit the points again. So first, I'd like to come to violent and neither effective or, well, you think it's just barely over the line of effective, right?
Right. I think it's causes fear and hatred of people, and I'd be concerned about that as a way of trying to teach people something. If we want people to be peaceful, I'm not sure that we should show them how to be violent.
Well, that's a good point, because we're in a culture of violence.
Right.
And that seems to be the default. Well, Don, I noticed that you think it's effective, and you think it's kind of not.
Well, I think it's effective because it's indeed showing what's happening and doing so descriptively in a way that people can understand pretty clearly what's happening. So I think it's effective. I think on the whole it's nonviolent in the sense that it is information that's presented. Now obviously it will stir up feelings so that there's some kind of assault on people, but on the whole it's nonviolent in the sense that there's no personal attack on the students. It is confrontational, but I think both effective and generally nonviolent.
Because what we don't know is what he did for those students after showing them that video, right? Right. Because that was whenever I first heard it. That's kind of where I got my knowledge.
But almost in the other way is withholding evidence. I mean, withholding the actual situation. I mean, it's a very clear description of what's happening.
It's a fact. Okay, Ryan, you're out the door, baby. I mean, that's,
almost.
You're at effective and violent.
Yes. Well, without knowing the whole story, it's hard to like say exactly what happened afterwards, which is why I chose the effective and violent side. I feel that it is extremely violent because they're just showing one side of the story. They're not showing maybe what Blackwater security was doing to some of the Iraqi civilians, or what U.S. civilians were doing to innocent civilians, or U.S. soldiers were doing to innocent civilians. And the reason why I also feel that it is effective is that these children are just, or high school students or whatever, just seeing one side of it based on the scenario that was presented to us. And to me, that is extremely violent and extremely effective to them. How they're going to be moved, I don't know, but it could move them to be like, I'm going to go join the army. I mean, there's a very time when there's military, recruiters in the high schools that it could be very powerful scene for them to see. Or also horrifying.
And at the other side, the other corner, ineffective and nonviolent?
Well, as far as the ineffective, I feel like just presenting it in that way, sort of the flash in the pan, here's a shocking video, just sort of perpetuates a desensitization and not a pursuit of knowledge about the issue, but just something that would make you detract from it and say, like I don't want to be a part of this at all. Like I don't want to know any more about it because it's freaking me out. So I think that's an effective. As far as the nonviolent, I stood here because I thought it was at least not too confrontational of an approach on the teacher's part. The video was confrontational, and I'm also sort of questioning that. So on this axis, I might be a little grayer.
This exercise like this is a great way to explore how your community or group might feel about different actions that are being discussed. So this is a convenient tool that you can do pretty easily, and it sparks people to discuss things that may not be brought up otherwise. So, and especially having permission to let yourself be moved by other people's comments. We talked about what we can do, in the small groups and then in a large group debrief about what else we can do to close the SOA. Particularly the work legislatively is important. What we do symbolically here this weekend is important. The legislative work is important. So I think Janet's right. Let's take just a few minutes, and those of you who have been here before, why do you come back? Why are you here this time?
So I wanted to be at the last vigil. Close it.
Yeah!
I was going to say encouragement. You, with such a big group who has the same vision, you know, we have a whole year until this may happen again, and it's easy to get discouraged.
Be spiritually fed.
Sleep deprivation.
Renewal. To know that there are this many people that are like thinking. In a small community, it gets kind of lonesome.
Heard the desire for sleep deprivation? Another spiritual practice.
I come for the gathering of the remnants of the religious and cultural left to create a 60s-like carnival atmosphere.
And what's the name of that group that was handing that out and doing their form of public witness?
American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. That's nicely royal line there.
Well, I'm still rebelling against my religious upbringing, so in my regular life, I don't have much contact with people involved in churches. And so I just love to come here and be with Christians that really believe what Christ taught. Because then afterwards I go visit the Christians that are my family. Then I just want to bomb the world.
Take comfort, you are not alone.
Yeah, right.
Anybody else? Why do you keep coming back to SOI?
The job isn't done yet.
I keep coming back.
The job is not done.
The job isn't done yet.
Right.
Yeah, Don, why are you here?
Well, the first time I came with a group of people from the church that I belong to, and one of the families in our church are from Guatemala who fled the destruction of their village. And I've been to the village and I've seen the spot where his mother and father were killed. The story is that a hand grenade was dropped out of a helicopter and blew them up in a particular place in the village. So I keep seeing these friends around the community, and I just find when I get here that I am rejuvenated and inspired, and I can't stay away. Just can't stay away.
I appreciated getting to know people, like all the face-to-face exercises we did, because it really, being around people like this is really awesome in itself, but getting to know them on a deeper level is gratifying beyond all comprehension, especially, get names and stuff. We're going to see each other at the protest and say hi, and it's going to be really exciting.
Yay.
So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Someone else?
I appreciated the section from a letter from Birmingham Jail. Coming from sort of a peace education background and talking about the different movements and everything, it was just a nice base to then talk about what we do here at SOA and the cross-spectrum work that we're doing.
All right, and what are the things that could have been done better, that would have been more helpful to you, or done a different way? Something else added?
Lunch.
This probably sounds really small, but
bothered me when we were leading discussions and the word opponent was used to describe the other person that we're hassling and hassle line, or vice versa. So maybe in the future, different language could be used to describe people. I don't personally think of them. I think of them as potential people that I can persuade.
Maybe just other.
Well, Gandhi used the word enemy and opponent, but he didn't treat them in a way that maybe we think of those words. So, yes, but I understand that. I understand what you're saying, but those words also help sometimes because they connect with our feelings. It depends how we view them, I think, yeah. But Gandhi sets an example for me in using those words. So, on the other hand, Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, he says, who would have thought Mandela and de Klerk would have ended up in the same administration? They were opponents. But he said, let us build reconciliation in from the very first step of our relationship together. By respecting each other and assuming that we will end up partners. So, you know, language is important. I hear what you're saying, I understand that. I also understand, I don't view opponents as a negative word, so, but some people do.